All right, today we're reviewing the La Marzocco Linea Mini R, probably the most requested piece of gear to review across my whole channel right from the very beginning. If there is one machine that people kind of tend to consider like the end game espresso machine, it's probably the Linea Mini. These are really, really nice espresso machines. Are they perfect espresso machines? No, they're not. So in this video, we're gonna look at what are all the things that are great about these, what are all the things that, in my opinion, are maybe not so great about these. Most importantly, who is this machine for? And is it actually that endgame espresso machine that you think it is? Now, this is called the Linea Mini R. It is the updated version of the OG Linea Mini. It was sent to me by my partners at Espresso Parts. Fantastic team there. Love the whole crew. I'll have their link to this machine down there in the description. Now, the Mini is really a bit of a home/light commercial hybrid. It arguably is pretty overpowered for the average home, especially with the release of the new Micra, and it can very comfortably hold its own in a light commercial setting. But before we get into like the nitty-gritty on this thing, let's give a quick overview of the features and let's make an espresso. First off, you have the main power switch over here on the side. Then you have some very simple controls on the front. You have a tap for hot water right here. You have the main paddle, which engages the pump and the brew group. And then you have another knob for steam right here. When you're actually pulling espresso, it's got a shot timer up here. This is a new addition for the Mini R. It's also got a gauge over on this side that shows your pump pressure. And this gauge right here shows the steam boiler pressure. It's very simple, very minimalistic and intuitive. And that's one of the things that has made La Marzocco so popular. My wife, Sarah, and I, we've had a lot of espresso machines through here, and for the most part, she can't really be bothered to use them. You know, you'd walk up to them and they seem a little bit complicated, and there is a learning curve there. And we've had this machine for about 6 months now, actually using it every day. And after a few reps of watching me use it, she thought, hey, I think I could actually use that. And I was very surprised by that because that was the first time that she has kind of taken the initiative and said, hey, I would like to actually make coffee on this thing. And I think that is a testament to the user experience of La Marzocco's. You know, they just are wrapped up in this very nice package that is not at all intimidating, despite the very high level of performance that these machines achieve. La Marzocco's also come with, let's say, a very high price tag at like $5,900 US. And where I live here in Canada, actually, they come in even a little bit higher than that. You know, if you're looking for the most amount of features per dollar, you don't typically tend to go for La Marzocco. When you're looking for the tops in user experience, bulletproof consistency, reliability, and you're not afraid to shell out a little bit of cash to get what you want, that's when you tend to look at a La Marzocco. And the espresso that they make is fantastic. Perfect. Now you can see the machine stopped there on its own. That's because I'm using the Acaia Lunar Brew By Weight scale. We'll talk more about that in a minute. This is a Micra Gesha espresso blend, actually. Wow. That might be the best shot of this I've actually pulled so far. That is really tasty. All right, now that I got my cup of coffee, before we get into some of those comparisons and some of those things that may actually put you in another direction besides the Mini, let's just do a really quick overview of some specs and some of those one layer down features. Firstly, this is a dual boiler espresso machine. That means there is a boiler for steam, and it is a big fat one at like 3 liters. Then there is a second boiler for brewing espresso, and that comes in much smaller at 0.17 liters. Now, the way that it works once you get in here is that there is some tubing that kind of runs through the steam boiler, through the wall and back out. That actually preheats the water on its way into the brew boiler. We will come back to that because there is some important stuff there. It does make for a more temperature stable espresso environment though. The brew boiler is what's called a saturated group, meaning it's kind of just sitting right on top of the group head here and keeping everything hot just by being there. Both of those boilers are temperature controlled via the La Marzocco Home app, which I have some things to say about. The brew boiler you can control in increments of 1/10 of a degree, which is fantastic. And the steam boiler, you have a little bit less control over. Doesn't really make a difference though. You can set it between 1 to 3 settings and they just call it power settings. It's powered by a very pleasant sounding, in my opinion, rotary pump. You know, you turn it on and it just feels like the machine's got a little bit of soul, like it's got a very pleasant sound while it's running. And the pressure that that pump runs at is actually controllable up here with a little screw terminal that's accessible without even taking any of these panels off, which is absolutely fantastic. I tend to flip-flop in between doing like 6-bar shots and doing 9-bar shots. I just pulled this at 9-bar, but 6-bar also is fantastic. If anything, that might actually be my preference right now. It's got this massive and very easily removable drip tray, and you just empty it by just tilting it out with this spout right here. It's so convenient. And it's got a float that tells you when it's full, but honestly, it is so big, you really just end up emptying it long before it's full, in my experience. You know, the drip tray can fit over like 2 liters, which is by far the biggest drip tray I've ever used. It's pretty nice to not have to worry about emptying that every other day. And I mean, the water reservoir, which is kind of tucked in behind the drip tray there, that is 2.5 liters. Now you can also plumb it in, both the supply and the drainage. That has some advantages, but it's also totally fine to just run it off the reservoir. The drip tray is stainless, as well as the cup warmer up here. The backsplash is no longer chrome, it's painted, which I think is a much better look. It comes with a Cool Touch steam wand. Stock, this comes with a plastic tip, which also is Cool Touch. There is a metal tip included, which I just thought the plastic tip looked kind of funky, so I swapped that out, even though this does heat up a little bit more. It's also got these new, they call it soft touch accents, which in my opinion look a lot better than the original shiny, glossy plastic. You know, I was really, if anything, biased against this. I thought if I ever end up with a Mini, that is the first thing that I'm gonna change. Now, La Marzocco does offer some wood kits now, which is nice. You only used to be able to get those aftermarket, but I do have to say, having this around for 6 months, the black has definitely grown on me and it feels great, nice to touch. It's plastic, but it does have a higher end feel. It also comes with a 7 gram, 14 gram, 17 gram, and 21 gram espresso baskets. I use aftermarket baskets anyways, but it does come with those. Comes with this convex tamper. Again, I use my own tamper. Also a 12-ounce milk pitcher, and this convertible portafilter, which is probably one of the more controversial decisions by La Marzocco on the new Mini. This is new with the R. We saw this first on the Micra, and in some regards, it's very nice. You know, the bottom quickly and easily just snaps off. Super easy to clean. It's also really nice for temperature stability. You know, a portafilter takes a lot of extra time to heat up when this whole bottom assembly is metal. Now, the downside is, obviously, it's plastic. It doesn't look the greatest. If you're spending this amount of money on an espresso machine, you may not want plastic parts right here, and that's totally fair. And a lot of people feel like, and I would agree, that the way it looks when it's bottomless looks kind of funky. It's definitely function over form. So, I don't know. Personally, I use an aftermarket bottomless. I use the Passato 58.5 portafilter I got from Coffee Addicts. There are lots of other options out there as well, but like it or hate it, this is what the Minis come with now. One thing about these soft touch plastic knobs that I actually really like is there is this kind of mirror finish metal piece in here. And as you're moving around the machine, it just catches light and reflects it in a way that feels very nice and very high end. Doesn't really get captured, in my opinion, in photos or videos that La Marzocco has out. And once I actually got it into my kitchen, I really like that. Okay, a handful of features that I want to dive a little bit deeper in and are really cool. Number one is pre-brewing and pre-infusion. Now, this is a little techie, so if you're not totally into this, you can just skip ahead in the chapter list. Traditional pre-infusion happens when an espresso machine is plumbed in and the water is heated in there, but it's kind of pressurized at what's called line pressure. Basically the pressure that will push water through the pipes on its own. And when the valve gets opened and the espresso puck is allowed to saturate with just that pressure, that is pre-infusion from a traditional espresso machine standpoint. And when you plumb in this machine, you can pre-infuse in that way. Now, not all these machines are plumbed in, but there are still some advantages to pre-infusion that manufacturers like to try and give you. You know, if you can pre-saturate that puck before the full pressure hits, it can help with channeling, make for a more even extraction, all of that. So La Marzocco will give you a kind of pre-infusion analog, which they call pre-brewing. Now, this is very similar to what like 90% of espresso machines are actually doing when they call it pre-infusion. They're turning on the pump for a short amount of time, putting some water into the puck, and then letting it pause. Whether you want to call that pre-brewing or pre-infusion, I think is up to you. Now, in most cases, the pump will kind of turn on and it will slowly actually just build up to full pressure. And if it's not getting up to full pressure, it's because it's generally just running for a shorter amount of time. And that is true here as well. You know, you can pre-infuse for up to like 10 seconds and then pause for another 10 seconds. And the way they've implemented that is pretty ingenious. See, the issue that happens with that style of pre-brewing or pre-infusion is that as that pressure is building, in order for it to pause, they need to kind of kill that pressure at a certain point. And what most machines do is they open a solenoid, release all the pressure, and let the machine sit until the pump turns on again. Now that can actually unseat your puck and in some cases make for actually increased channeling, which is a bad thing. The way the Mini has gotten around that is they've added an extra solenoid in there. So when the pump stops, the pressure doesn't actually escape. It stays contained in there until the pump turns on again for the main extraction. In my experience, I was getting a lot more predictable results with pre-brewing on the Mini than I would on other machines. When I would use it, I would never get hit with surprise channeling. It just worked, which is really nice. As for how I actually tend to run it, I try and dial in my pre-infusion settings. You do this via the app. Yes, we're coming back to that, but I dial it in so that I just get beating on the bottom of the basket and then it pauses to kind of just hang out in that state. You know, maybe a couple drips go into the cup, but not much more than that. And then I turn it on after a brief pause for the remainder of the extraction. Very cool how they've implemented that feature with the additional solenoid. Now, the second feature that I want to really talk about is Brew By Weight. You know, a lot of espresso machines will use something called volumetrics in order to create a programmable espresso shot. And basically that's measuring the amount of water that is kind of traveling into the espresso puck. The issue with that is, you know, depending on what your dose is or how much water the puck is retaining or how much channeling you have, it doesn't always translate to the exact same amount of espresso in your cup, at least until you get to really high performing volumetrics. The Mini pairs with a special edition Acaia Lunar and actually measures the output as it's coming out into your cup and tells the machine when it should stop in order to get the exact right amount of espresso in your cup. Now it uses a bit of an algorithm to do that, and it takes about 3 shots to kind of reconfigure itself. And once it has done that, it is actually really accurate to within like 0.1, 0.2. Sometimes it's exactly right on of a gram as far as weight goes. Pretty impressive when it comes to standard espresso shots. On the whole, as a home user, when it works, this is a really dreamy feature. You know, it really, I know my diva side is going to come out here. In the morning, when the kids are fighting with each other, they're yelling, it's loud. All I want is my espresso to pull properly, and I don't really want to be fussed with very much else. I know it's only 30 seconds, but it is really nice to be able to turn on an espresso machine, turn around, dump another bowl of Cheerios in my kid's bowl, and know that the machine is going to pull the espresso exactly the way that I want. A couple issues with this feature though. Number one, just on a practical level, if you are switching coffees a lot or switching the type of profiles that you like to use and an espresso pulls a lot differently than the shot that you pulled the last time, it is going to be a lot less accurate. It really is the most accurate when you're doing the same shot several times in a row. I kind of get that that's a limitation of the way they have set up the algorithm and the machine learning. I can deal with that. More frustrating to me is if you get a sprayer or a splash of espresso on the buttons as it's pulling, the scale can actually like glitch out and it actually won't stop the machine until you do. Now, if you pull with a spouted portafilter, this is not really going to be an issue. If you're pulling with a bottomless though, it's absolutely something that you need to be aware of. And not only that, But if you are like pulling turbos or something like that, things with a very high flow rate, in my experience, when the scale gets hit with a really high flow rate, again, it doesn't really know what's happening and it kind of resets and re-tears itself. And as a result, it's kind of just doing this funky thing. And the end result is that the feature doesn't work the way that it's supposed to. So really, there is kind of a certain set of circumstances that the Brew By Weight pulls in properly, and outside of that, it's not going to be functioning optimally, which is a little frustrating because this Lunar costs about twice as much as a standard Lunar just because it has that integration and the La Marzocco logo on the side of it. And this is something that people really took issue with when this feature was released. You know, people talk about the La Marzocco tax and why does it have to be twice as expensive? That seems obscene. Lots of owners are very happy with their Brew By Weight Lunars and they were happy to pay the $400, but I get that that is a contentious issue. Overall, I like the feature. I have learned when to rely on it and when it may not work the way it's supposed to. Could those issues be potentially fixed with future firmware updates? I hope so. Couple other features that I really like. Again, this one is a little diva-ish, and I recognize that. There is an automated self-cleaning cycle. So basically you put the blind basket in your portafilter, put the cleaner in, put it in your espresso machine, open the app, trigger the self-cleaning cycle, turn it on, and it will stand there and backflush itself over and over again over about 90 seconds. Again, being able to just backflush your machine when there's a lot of craziness going on in the house and you just want to not worry about it and come back to it and take the thing out when it's all done, that is nice. Also in the app, you can turn the steam boiler on and off if you want to save some power. We'll come back to that one. The PID temperature controls are in there, as well as the Brew By Weight settings and pre-brewing settings, and sleep and wake schedules. In theory, fantastic that all of that is in this kind of visually pleasing app experience and kind of buried one level beyond what I would really need to access on a day-to-day basis. In practice, again, this was an area where I felt like I wasn't totally getting the La Marzocco experience. Firstly, you need to set up an account to really even use the app, which, okay, you do that one time and then it's done. Then there's a Bluetooth connection where basically the machine will talk directly to your phone, as well as a Wi-Fi connection where you get the machine on your network and it all communicates that way. The issue is that almost all of the settings in the app are locked out unless you are connected to Wi-Fi. And for whatever reason, I have had a lot of issues getting this thing connected to Wi-Fi and keeping that connection stable. So most of the time when I open the app, I cannot actually access most of those features that I want to change unless I throw it into configuration mode, remove the Wi-Fi network, re-add it. Sometimes I have to do that a couple times, which will get me access that one time. And then odds are the next time I come back to it, I'm going to have to do that again for some reason. Also, if you're in like a pop-up setting where you don't actually have Wi-Fi or you don't have the credentials for a local network, it's the same scenario. You can't get in and change some of those settings if you need to. I have hope that this part of the experience with the Mini can get better. You know, apps can get redeveloped and machines can get firmware updates. And I have to say, like, to La Marzocco's credit, I have not had a positive app experience with any espresso machine. They all tend to be kind of buggy. But again, La Marzocco kind of has that luxury positioning. And when you get a luxury product and you open the app, the expectation is that it just will work and you don't have any issues. And on a day-to-day basis, you know, the experience of this machine is wonderful. And I wish that the app lived up to that same bar. Now, a couple other differences from the OG Mini that I want to make sure we go over. Again, they have that easily adjustable pump pressure up here. That is really dreamy. You know, going from 6 to 9 bar, I'm flipping back and forth in about 2 seconds. It's really, really nice to have that so accessible. For the tech heads, this is kind of interesting. There is a component in an espresso machine called a gicleur, or if you're American, you would probably call it a jiggler. It's basically the nozzle that the water comes out of as it's entering the group head. These were originally 0.8 millimeters on the OG minis, and you saw a lot of people swapping them for a smaller gicleur or jiggler at 0.6 millimeters. And in this version of the Mini, La Marzocco has actually included a 0.6 millimeter gicleur or jiggler stock. Now, that translates into a lower max flow rate, which can be good or bad depending on what you're looking for. It can make for a little bit more resilience against channeling because you're not getting a huge flood of water coming in there at one point. Or if that's actually something that you're looking for, like a huge amount of flow all at once for like, say, turbos or other applications, you may actually prefer the 0.8. But regardless, in these, they now come with a 0.6. More than that though, because of the design of that part, things kind of actuate in there in such a way that that part cleans itself. And scale buildup around that part was traditionally a bit of an issue for minis. And because that part is now self-cleaning, it's much more resilient from a maintenance standpoint. Other differences are obviously the body lines are kind of different compared to the original Mini. I like the changes actually, you know, they kind of flare up and to the back, a little bit more like a sports car vibe. And again, this shot timer up here is new. Now, from a practical standpoint, I just love having this here. Having that time just right there, super visible, is really, really nice, super practical. Design language feels very in line with their larger commercial machines. I think it looks fantastic in black. I have to be honest, in any other color, I feel like that part does not look as nice as it could. Also a small one, the gauge of steel on the body panels is a little bit thinner than the last Mini. And again, that float in the drip tray along with some of the other features we've already gone over. Okay, let's talk about some practical tests. Starting with temperature stability, something that La Marzocco is very widely known for. When I'm testing espresso machines, I use a device called a SCACE device, and it's attached to a digital thermometer. It tests both the pressure and temperature stability of espresso machines. And the Mini, you know, it's designed to be a rock from a temperature stability standpoint, and it really is. It is so stable. You know, you pull a shot and it comes up to temp and it just stays right there. And a big part of that is because of that HX style preheating for the water that is on its way to the brew boiler that kind of goes through this plumbing that kind of intersects and goes into the steam boiler, which is great as long as you're running the machine with that steam boiler on. If you get it into your head that you want to save some power and run the machine with the steam boiler off, if you don't actually need to steam, you know, this is me, most of the time I'm drinking straight espresso or Americano, you are not gonna get that same stability. You know, when I tested this, I was both getting an increased offset, you know, it wasn't coming quite up to that temperature that the PID was set to, and also there was a fall off in temperature throughout the shot. Now, can you taste that difference? I would say the difference in a lot of cases is maybe not as much as you might think, and you can overcome a lot of it just by setting your PID a couple degrees hotter. But when La Marzocco is really known for its temperature stability, I really wish that you could run it in that configuration and get the same amount of stability, and it just doesn't. So I'm gonna say, if that's something that's important to you or you just don't want to worry about it, my suggestion for the best results, run it with a steam boiler on, which will have power implications. Steaming milk, you know, again, something else that La Marzoccos and Minis in particular are really known for, how fast they steam, and that's because of the very large amount of power that they have in that 3-liter steam boiler. You know, the first time I got this machine, I cranked it right up and I had that little 12-ounce pitcher and I opened the steam valve all the way and I just about blew all the milk out of the pitcher. You know, you can steam a drink in like 5, 10, 15 seconds, depending on how large the milk drink is. So tons of power there. Heat up time, this was actually surprising to me. You know, when you turn it on, it'll give you like 3 dots on the timer that will tell you it's warming up, and it will actually tell you that it's at full temperature between, you know, 5 to 8 minutes. When I threw the scase on there, it wasn't actually quite up to temperature at that point, but I did find after like 10 to 12 minutes, it was at its final temperature and totally stable. And you know, the steam boiler wasn't fully up to temp, but as far as the temperature of the water coming out of the brew boiler, absolutely consistent at that point. Sound, very quiet, and probably the most satisfying sounding machine that I have used. So we have fantastic performance, incredible looks, great espresso, some really cool features that, you know, they have some quirks, but they're also really nice, and a incredibly enjoyable user experience. Is the La Marzocco Linea Mini a no-brainer? I'm gonna say not totally. In addition to those quirks, there are a couple other negatives that have come up for me. But first, I want to talk about the Micra, which is the smaller, cheaper, and home-focused little sister to this machine. And, you know, I have to be honest, I think for like 80%, maybe even more, of home users, that machine from a technical and budget standpoint is probably actually a better fit. It's not a mini, but you are getting that La Marzocco experience at a much lower price. It also doesn't use nearly as much power. It's smaller, more compact, and people love those machines. One exception though is if you are looking at kind of a home/commercial hybrid use. People do use Micras for small pop-ups, but the Mini is really kind of in a bit of a sweet spot when it comes to that kind of use case. You know, I've done this personally like a half dozen times, you know, taking it out for, you know, I'll do like a free service where people can just come and get as many drinks as they want. Those are very busy. You know, you're pounding out drink after drink, and the Mini is just like a rock in those settings. Now, is that kind of use case the only reason that you may have to have a Mini at home? No, there are some other reasons, and they may get a little contentious. Before we get there though, let's talk about some of my personal negatives about this machine. You know I've already harped on the app. In so many ways, this machine is so nice to use, and I wish that that experience extended to the app. Couple other things, Brew By Weight, we've already talked about that. I really wish I could just pull bottomless and never have to worry about whether or not the Brew By Weight is going to work or not. One thing that I missed on day one was I really wanted those always on barista lights. It's really nice to be able to come out to a dark kitchen at night, you see your espresso machine just sitting there softly glowing. There are barista lights on this, but they only turn on when the pump is actually running. So this is a small thing, but if La Marzocco ever does update that app, I wish that being able to toggle those on or off, regardless of what state the machine was in, that would be a cool option. And I almost didn't even mention this, but I actually had some paint durability issues with this. You know, taking a machine like this out to do pop-ups is kind of like a primary use case for the Mini, and so I wanted to test that, but also it's a La Marzocco, so I'm gonna baby the thing, wrap it up in towels and really transport it carefully. And somehow on the other side of those pop-ups, it had several chips in it. And this didn't just happen once, this happened a couple different times. Also, the very underside of this backsplash here, you know, that seems to be a wear point where the paint is actually starting to come off along the bottom. Overall, less resilient, I would say, than other machines that I just have kind of tossed in the back of my car and taken wherever. I was very careful with this, and still to have some chips and stuff, I was a little disappointed. Now, I have to say, when that happened, I kind of put it on the radar of both Espresso Parts and La Marzocco like right away, and they were both incredibly responsive. You know, the first response was not, oh, what were you doing? It was, oh, wow, that doesn't look right. We need to do something about that. And they sent me out some new panels. And also, this is a first run unit. The backsplash is a new painted part. And just like cars, you know, the first model year, there's going to be some kinks worked out. So I have an appreciation for that too. I don't know if that is a widespread thing or not. If I'm going to spend this amount of money on an espresso machine for the purpose of taking it out and around, I'm going to want that paint to be rock solid. So all I have to say is if you have issues with that, hit up your support team, and in my experience, they will take very good care of you. Also, I haven't seen any kind of widespread complaint about that. That's just been my experience so far. Another potential negative for you could be power use. Minis are really kind of known for being pretty power hungry, and the new R is no exception. And there was a noticeable power increase in our power bill when we got it. Just a consideration. Again, the Micra uses a lot less power and is totally suitable for the majority of home users. This is a small one, but you know, when you pull out the drip tray and you pull out the water reservoir, the tube that actually connects it is pretty short, which I get. You know, you don't want it to kink up or anything in there when it's all kind of put back together. But you can't just refill it with a 5-gallon jug because it is so short. So you kind of have to disconnect it. You know, when I did the pop-ups, I would run into this because it was running off the reservoir in those cases. I'm really nitpicking with some of that stuff because this machine is so valuable and such an icon. If you're considering one, I really want you to know every little thing about it that you might find annoying. In my experience, on a day-to-day basis, it is so nice to use. I have not had a nicer user experience with any espresso machine. When you get behind the wheel, let's say, of one of these, it just feels like you are driving the nicest car around. It just has that level of polish and experience. And the espresso, it tastes fantastic, and it is just totally bulletproof and predictable. And delicious. But that brings us back to the question, who should actually buy one of these? And is it the endgame espresso machine that it's cracked up to be? And I think the answer to that depends on who you are and what you want to use it for. On the commercial side, if you're looking for the most amount of features per dollar, I would say that the Mini may not be for you. If you're thinking as a commercial user, I want to cheat the volumetrics by using this Brew By Weight, this was not the most practical solution for me in a commercial settings. You have to move it out of the way, you know, to purge, unless you want to purge right onto the scale. Getting the cups in and out of there is a little bit tighter. Tearing the scale, there just is a lot of little extra steps there that when you're humming a high volume commercial setting, volumetrics are just a little bit nicer. That being said, if you don't need volumetrics, the Mini is widely regarded as kind of the light commercial workhorse of the espresso industry. And one thing I will say to commercial users as you're kind of considering a machine, people will ask me, what machine should I buy for my pop-up or whatever? And I really say, talk to your local service techs, because at a certain point, your espresso machine is going to go down. Doesn't matter if it's La Marzocco or what brand it is, it's going to happen. And when that happens, you want to be able to resolve that issue as quickly as possible. Odds are you can find an espresso tech who will drive to you and service your La Marzocco. That is not always true for other brands. So if you are in a situation where you're looking at where you might need to ship your machine off for several weeks in order to get it repaired, that is not an ideal circumstance. Just something to consider, and one of the sleeper benefits to La Marzocco's from a commercial standpoint. Now for home users, why on earth would you get one of these over a Micra? The Micra doesn't do Brew By Weight, but there are some creative people on the internet who have found some ways around that. What other reasons might there be? Well, there are some people who just say, the Mini is an icon and I want a Mini. I know what I'm getting, I'm not fussed about the cost, and I want to have it on my kitchen counter. And not everybody is going to agree with that as a justification. If that's you and you're okay with that, that's fine. A little bit more practically than that, there are people out there who, you know, maybe cost isn't a huge factor and they're going between the Micra and the Mini, and the Micra just doesn't quite fit in their space, or it looks a little funny, it looks a little too small, and people are like, you know, the Mini, it's a little bigger, that actually works better for me, it feels better in the space that I have, and I would like the extra little bit of cup clearance and the extra money. It's not really a huge deal for me. And I would say for those people, that's also okay. If the smaller footprint of the Micra works for you and you have no other real need for a machine that's bigger, then honestly, the Micra is a good machine. Again, it is coming at a little bit more premium of a price point. It's not going to give you the most amount of features per dollar, but it's solid. If you're in a home commercial hybrid kind of situation where you need it to actually do both, there's no question Minis are kind of the standard for that kind of setup, and they're going to deliver. You know, there's no denying that there's this conception out there that La Marzoccos are like the it machine. You got the Micra, you got the Mini, absolutely iconic espresso machines. And part of what makes them so great is not that they do everything. It's that what they do really, really well. If you want a rock solid, predictable, flat profile espresso shot, La Marzoccos are kind of in a league of their own when it comes to pedigree and performance, not to mention service. But some home enthusiasts may not actually want that flat profile. Maybe you actually want to be able to like tweak everything, every little variable, pump pressure, flow, temperature ramps, all these different things. You know, you can get that with a machine like the La Marzocco Strada X1. Absolutely crazy machine. Would I love to review that machine? Absolutely. It also costs $20,000. Most home users that want to go in that direction are going to end up with something more along the lines of a decent. Some enthusiasts really like the spring lever profile. Others really like manual direct levers. All of those things do things that the Mini actually can't do. And to say, hey, I actually want to go in a different direction, there's nothing wrong with that. However, if you want perfectly consistent, flat profile espresso shots, there is a very strong argument to make that few espresso machines can do that as well as a La Marzocco. And when people say that, really the machine that they tend to be talking about is the Mini. Is it the perfect espresso machine for everybody? Absolutely not. Is it a very, very good espresso machine that 99% of owners end up being extremely happy with? Absolutely. If this video was helpful, I know it was long and detailed. I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. That's the best thing that you can do to help me out. And I would love to hear from you in the comments what you think about the Mini. Maybe you're actually an owner of either the R or the OG. And if you're watching and you feel like, hey, he kind of missed this, or it would be great for people to know this, drop it in the comments, because that is something that's super valuable for people who are considering a machine like this, is to hear from previous and current owners. So make sure to drop your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what you want to see from me next. I hope your next cup of coffee is as good as this one was, and we'll see you next time.